today. My name is Mills Soko, Professor of International Business and Strategy at WBS Business School. I'm also Director of Development and Partnerships, and it is my pleasure to facilitate today's discussion. Our WBS dialogues form a very important part of our mission at WBS, which is about impact and positive change. One of the ways in which we ensure we have impact is through our regular WBS Leadership Dialogues. A business school must constantly engage and collaborate with leaders who themselves have had a positive impact to share lessons learned and to gain important insights through their extensive knowledge, experience on the ground. We've had the privilege of speaking to many top leaders through this platform, men and women who demonstrate both integrity and resilience, leaders who have managed to steer their ships through massive technological change and constant disruption, not only through being resilient, but also by being agile and innovative. The banking sector has undergone some massive changes in recent years, and bankers need to be extremely agile and innovative to survive this tough industry. And so it's a great honor to welcome today one of this country's most successful banking executives. I've been looking forward to hearing Mr. Rautenbach's perspective on the future of banking and what banks need to do to navigate tough times and meet the changing needs and demands of their customers. First of all, I would like to give a very brief introduction to Mr. Rautenbach. Arrie has more than 25 years banking experience. He has held a number of positions within Absa, including the group's chief risk officer and the chief executive of Absa's retail and business banking unit, as well as Absa Financial Services Limited. He has been a group member at Absa for 6 years. Under Arrie's stewardship, Absa was awarded Best Retail Bank in Africa in 2020 by the Asian Banker. Among other awards, Arrie was named Retail Banker of the Year by the International Banker magazine. He holds an MBA from Northwest University. Thanks to all of you again for joining us today. You will have an opportunity to ask questions of our guests. Please use the chat box to write your questions or comments, and I will relate them to Mr. Rautenbach. In case you miss anything, this event is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel. Arrie, very welcome to WBS Business School. We're very pleased that you're able to join us today to talk about your leadership journey and business. The first question I would like to ask you, Arrie, perhaps is about where you come from. You know, you were born in Durban in 1965. That is 3 years before I was born, so you're older than me.
I'm the senior partner here then, is that what you're saying?
So you are the senior partner here. You thought I was the senior partner.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
What are your memories of growing up, Arrie?
Well, yeah, no, thank you for the invite, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this program. I have to say that I think, having looked at some of the conversations that you've had with leaders across many industries, it certainly is a great privilege to be part of this conversation. And congratulations to you and the business school for putting this together. I listened very carefully when you started introducing me. You referred to Mr. Rautenbach. I'm very glad you've switched from Mr. Rautenbach to Arrie, because that's certainly what I would prefer.
Yeah.
No, thanks for that, Mills. And I think you go back straight to to when I was born and my early sort of childhood years. But as I think about that and as I reflect on that, I actually think about that with great fondness, very good memories. I grew up as the eldest of 3 brothers. We grew up in a house that didn't have much at the time, but it did feel like we were always happy. So if I think about the communities at the time, we were always part of a part of the community. So you feel like you are a child of the community, and you experience what you've got in abundance. Actually, as I think about it. So whilst it was difficult times, 3 brothers, having fun, being part of the community, but living with what with what you've got and enjoying that. So that was certainly, well, that's certainly how I think about. I think the early years that shaped me profoundly, actually. And I'm sure we're going to touch on that a little bit later.
Yeah. Your mother was very influential in your personal development. She was the anchor of your family when you're growing up, and she significantly influenced your own perspective on life. Yeah. How did she do this, Arrie?
Yeah. Now, look, Mills, I think when you talk about me and my family, there's no doubt that that my mother was the anchor in that in that family, both from raising us as a family, but also from providing the income. She was the main source of income for the family. So, and I think in hindsight, I've often reflected on this. So when I think about my mother, I think about her with tremendous respect, because she's made tremendous sacrifices. As I said, raising three boys under very difficult circumstances, but raising us well. And as I said, she also had to hold a full-time job while she was doing this. So as I think about this, I think about my mother as the epitome of somebody that resembles hard work and this never give up attitude. So having had to do what she did it with a smile. Doesn't matter what the circumstances were. So first things that come to mind for me is hard work, resilience, never give up. But I think, also being raised by the hand of a woman, I think it brings with it compassion and care, things that you very often don't think about. And then I think as I think about how my mother used to relax, and the time that she had to relax, she used to consume books. She used to be reading incredibly much, and that was her way, I think, of relaxing as I think about that. So that certainly brought about a curiosity about the world, and I think always encouraging us as boys to go out there, not being limited by by what we've got, but going and exploring the world. But I think this relationship with my mother has also culminated into the relationship with my daughter that I've got today. So that relationship that I had with my mother, I think, is now core to the relationship that I have, that I have with my daughter. And as you pass that generational experience on, in life. So as I think about her, definitely no doubt the anchor, and I think has made me and my brothers what we are today. No doubt. Yeah.
Arrie, I want to move on, to Absa. You're in the hot seat now, right?
Yeah.
So you were appointed, as Absa's Group CEO in March 2022. So that was a year ago, and you're about approaching your first anniversary as CEO. I think you have already passed that, but
yeah.
How have you settled into this CEO role since your appointment a year ago? And what would you say have been your key achievements, to date in terms of your strategic priorities?
Yeah. Mills, you talk about March 2022. It's just the other day, but it certainly feels like a long time ago. And it's because of just what you get through, in such a short period of time. I think what if you look at me and my career, I've been part of Absa for basically most of my professional career. You've spoken about the fact earlier that I've been part of this executive committee since 2015. So this is an organization that I know well. It's a sector that I know well. It's a sector and an organization that I understand. So I think because of that, the transition into the CEO role was a relatively smooth transition. So that allowed me to, from the beginning, think very carefully and very deliberately around how I want to approach this this new challenge of being the CEO for for the broader group. And I think how I thought about that was the immediate start of what is required of a new CEO, and then once that is settled, just to think about what comes next. And this has only been a year, but I think if I think about what I was focused on right as the announcement was made, was certainly to ensure that that there's no disruption to the organization, so that there's clarity in terms of direction. Very importantly, I was part of the Exco, but now I'm expected to lead the Exco together with with the rest of the organization, to ensuring that there's very strong Exco cohesion as we are collectively dealing with with this change, but not just cohesion and alignment at the Exco, also at the senior leadership group across the organization, because an organization the size of ours isn't led every single day by the executive. It's led by the senior structures that that are in charge of all our businesses. And then, of course, it's the organizational cohesion. And I have to say that that the colleagues across the organization has been incredibly supportive since day one that I've taken over, that I've taken on this responsibility. Having said that, I think what's also important is, of course, as the CEO, you work very closely with your board. We also appointed the announcement of a new board chairman, Selo Moloko, at the same time that I've taken over. And the relationship between the chair and the CEO is a critical relationship for the success of the organization. And again, I think the support that I've gotten from Selo from day one has been nothing short of phenomenal. And I think he certainly helped me to transition into this role, as I said earlier, very, very smoothly. But apart from that, Mills, you've got to focus on stakeholders, you've got to focus on customers. I've spoken about colleagues. And then, of course, ensuring that operationally, the organization stays focused and you build on the momentum that we've had. A couple of key things that I've done since I've taken over, and I wanted to do that early, was to focus the organization as a Pan-African group. So until then, we've thought very much of ourselves as a South African bank with interests on the continent. We reset that vision to be clear that we want to see ourselves as a Pan-African bank, and that's important in terms of where we want to go next as a franchise. But also, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this a little bit later, as a bank, you're systemic to the economy, you're systemic to the markets that you operate in. And I think for me personally, it's very important that every colleague in our organization understands just how systemic we are. And as a consequence of that process, we've started a process in the bank very soon after I've taken over as CEO to reconnect with our DNA, to reconnect with our purpose. It's probably the better word to think about it. And the whole organization participated in resetting our purpose within the first year of me being the CEO. So what that allows us to do, it allows us to consolidate as a franchise, to consolidate as an organization, to become completely aligned to what we stand for and why we do the things that we do. And that's a critical element of our culture, as we go forward. But also, I had to make some key executive changes. I changed the operating model very quickly. We were a business that only had 2 commercial divisions. I've changed that to 5 commercial divisions and promoted people in the organization to take on those new commercial roles. And of course, I hired some new colleagues. So by the end of last year, or the start of this year, we were a completely new executive committee, but intact. Focus on what needs to be done. So what we've got now is we've got strategy clarity. There's no ambiguity around our strategy and where we're going. The purpose is very clear, and we'll understand a little bit later why that is so important for us. We've now got the right executive leadership in place, but also we've expanded the senior leadership executive below the group executive, and that gives us capacity, to focus on execution. And with this all being done in the first 12, 15 months of my tenure, it allows me as the CEO to step up and start focusing on broader matters, matters of global relevance, matters of regional relevance, and matters of South African relevance, because you're not operating in isolation, and you're not operating as an island. So basically what you hear is I got through a lot in a very short space of time, but the fact that I've been part of the organization and I understand the organization has allowed us to move on these elements quite quickly and quite decisively, to the point that we're now in a very, very good position to be able to move forward with what needs to be done. We often talk about what we do across the different levels in the organization, but it enables us now to be in that position that everybody can focus on what they need to focus on. We talk about the numbers on the jersey. So yeah, that's just the first 12 months, but I think we're in a good position to to take it forward from here.
Yeah, you've done a great deal, Arrie, and your colleagues. You're a very experienced banking executive. You've held many senior executive positions within the organization, and how important is experience to you? Gaining operational experience within a company in this context within Absa. How important for anybody who aspires to become a leader in an organization to gain operational experience, and how did your significant experience prepare you for this CEO role?
Yeah, well, I lost you there for a second, but I think it sounded like the question was around the importance of organizational experience, operational experience.
Yeah.
As you take over as a CEO.
Yes, you've been exposed to so many units and businesses, and that has given an all-round picture of the business. Yeah.
No, I think this is a very important question. I think especially for the audience that you've got in your business school, because these are all ambitious, highly upwardly mobile, individuals that want to change the world and have an impact. A corporate the size of ours, or any corporate, in fact, when it changes the CEO is a critical inflection point, in the journey of that organization. So obviously it's something which it's a moment which requires a lot of planning, a lot of thinking, a lot of wisdom when you change your CEO, irrespective of what the reasons are for changing that CEO. But it's a key inflection point, in the journey of any organization. So it's a highly sensitive time. Well, that's the point that I'm trying to make. Together with that, it obviously is also a big change for the individual that has to step into that role, or has to step up into that role, like it was the case with me being promoted from within the organization. So of course you want to ensure that that you have impact as early as possible, but have the right impact to be effective in the role that you've been appointed to. Because sitting at the helm of the organization, everything you do and say is systemic. If you were to think about it, the organization moves on every word that you say, even your sort of body language and and posture. So for me, I think understanding an organization and critically having experience, having worked through all the different ranks, different levels of an organization, different functions, commercial business units, functional business units, different levels of management over time, I think gives you great insight, gives you great experience to be able to step into that role, if that was your ambition, all along, with relative ease. And I think what that allows you to do, as you've heard from the previous question that you've asked, is to sort of hit the ground running quite quickly, but not making decisions and actions for the sake of making decisions, but making the right ones, because you've got a deep understanding of the organizational context, the organizational culture, the people in the organization, but also your stakeholders, regulators, investors, clients, so that you can think of that whole picture as you start acting, as the CEO. So in my experience, I think it certainly makes it a lot easier if you come from inside the organization and you've got deep experience of the organization, the environment that it operates in. But what it does require, and again, I'm thinking about your audience, it requires a certain amount of strategic patience and resilience to build up the competencies and capabilities over time to be ready when this opportunity comes, because it's obviously also a very, very competitive environment. And life happens to you as you go through your career. So if there's one key takeout maybe from this conversation, is just the importance of strategic patience as you manage your career, depending on whatever the ambition is that you've set yourselves. But having that understanding of the organization in that context, in my opinion, allows you to make the right calls from early on, and therefore be a lot more effective in that role a lot earlier, in your tenure.
That's very insightful, Arrie. Before I move on to Absa's business in Africa and now what you call a Pan-African footprint. You have been. I'm looking at you, and you have the exposure to all parts of the business, having led teams, diverse teams, and all that. Yeah. This is critical to a functional organization and a thriving organization, and how teams work from different backgrounds, from race, from gender, and all that. And you've done that. What would you say are the key ingredients of running functional teams? From your experience, what has worked? How do, for instance, you're presiding over your exco. You've always been, what is it that for you is important in terms of team dynamics? Yeah.
Look, I think, Mills, what's important is the word teamwork that you've just used there. A corporate the size of Absa is a hugely complex structure. It's a hugely complex ecosystem, if you were to think about it. And to make sense of that sort of ecosystem, that sense of complexity, you divide the organization into a structure, organizational structure, or organizational operating model that needs to be led by people that understand those parts of the organization exceptionally well, that you view as talented people, that that's part of the organizational journey, that's part of the organization's future, that you view as key to your team. So if you understand that organization and the structure you want to put in place, for me, critically is how you think about the people you want to surround yourself with, Mills, that are going to need each one of these components. Because if you think about a group executive structure, it's the most senior decision-making body, executive decision-making body in the corporate structure, which reports obviously through to the board next. So the ability to get that team to work cohesively, to align in terms of what it is that you want to try and achieve, and to do that deliberately, is critical to success over time. And that speaks to things like culture and DNA and purpose that I've touched on a little bit earlier, which I'm sure we will touch on again. But it's very important that you can get executive alignment, executive excitement, executive energy, around what you want to achieve with the corporate vision and strategy. We talk about vision and strategy quite easily, specifically in business schools. But I think the softer elements that come with that at this level in the organization is absolutely critical. Because what I've said earlier, every decision you make at this level in the organization is systemic, both positive as well as negative. And the ability to bring all of that together, it's all about that senior team that you bring together around you. I'm sure we're going to talk about leadership and leadership lessons a little bit later. But what I've learned, certainly in my career over time, is that as a leader, you never have all the answers. You're always going to rely on others, to help you to see the full picture. So the ability to bring a team together and play each team member to their strengths allows you, to create a structure that can give energy to an organization and be clear about the impact that you can have in the communities and societies over time.
Yeah, we have some questions in the chat box, which I'll come to shortly. But I would like to talk next, Arrie, about your African footprint as an organization, and your vision, your strategy for the continent, especially in light of what has been happening in recent years. We've seen some South African companies pulling out of the African continent, shutting down operations, ShopRite, game stores, Nempec, due to all sorts of reasons: currency volatility, weak consumer demand, regulatory issues. The question I want to ask is, do you think Africa is still an attractive destination for investment. And how has Absa fared on the, how have we fared on the continent, and what are your plans for the future, which you already alluded to? Maybe you can elaborate on those. When you say you want to build a Pan-African footprint, what do you mean by that, as opposed to what is happening currently, and how we've done on the continent as an organization, and whether the African continent, in your view and in the view of the company, remains an attractive investment destination?
Well, so I think you've mentioned quite a couple of key topics there, and you talk about the complexity, how quickly things change, moving into markets, companies moving out of markets. I think you're painting a picture there of just the sort of complexity and realities that one needs to deal with. When you sit on the executive committee of a big corporate structure that operates in more than one market. I think if you look at Absa and the history of our organization, we are an African bank. We've got our roots deeply set in Africa. Whether you think about how Absa was created in the South African context, and also if you think about every market that we've been in these markets for over 100 years, Mills. So we're deeply rooted as an African bank. In fact, I've touched a little bit earlier on the process that we've gone through to recommit to our purpose as a Pan-African bank. And maybe at this moment I can share it with you because it's something that we're extremely proud of. We talk about empowering Africa's tomorrow together, one story at a time.
Yeah.
Now, what you hear in that purpose statement, it's all about Africa and ensuring that Africa is relevant in the global stage, not just today, but tomorrow, and very closely related to us as Africans, our ability to tell stories and being able to walk with every single individual, or corporate, walk this journey together. So we are very clear that we African. We know Africa and the markets that we're operating in, and our sense is that this is our battleground, Mills. So to use a sort of a theoretical term, we have got full confidence that our continent is our destination. But of course, we need to do that, connecting our continent with the rest of the world, and that's the operating model that we put in place. If you look geopolitically right now, Africa is very much in the center stage again. As both the West and the East, are trying to reinvest, in the continent and our relevance on the continent. So this is the opportunity for us as Africans, and for us specifically as a Pan-African bank, to ensure that we play a critical part in ensuring that as Africans, we get our fair share of what's happening globally. So we're rooted in Africa. We know Africa. As I'm having this conversation, I'm thinking about the quality of leaders and the quality of businesses that we've managed to build up across the continent. We're in 12 markets on the continent, but each one of those markets is run by an incredibly skillful, competent, capable leadership team in each one of those markets. Whether you think about our business in Kenya or any other market, but any one of our businesses, these businesses are led by very capable people, Africans, that is rooted on the continent. So this for us is our battleground. This is what we focused on, but we'll do it in the context of the global dynamics. So we've got offices in New York that helps us to deal with the trade flow coming out of the New York, the US corridor. We've got offices in London that helps us to deal with the EU-UK trade corridor, and before the end of this year, we'll open an office in China to help us to deal directly with the flow coming from the east. And my sense is after that, we'll probably look at areas like the Middle East as another example, all to bring flow and trade onto the continent for reinvestment in the continent, and through that process, make us more competitive as a continent.
All right, Arrie, I will take 2 or 3 questions from the audience. One from Avin Budram. I'm not sure if you have a pen there, Arrie, to write these questions,
I do,
but just to note them. All right. The first one is, doesn't being part of the same exco team group for so long stifle innovation and risk-taking, and therefore makes Absa very ripe for disruption? Did you get that one?
I got it, yeah. I didn't hear the name of. I didn't hear the name of.
Is Avin.
Yeah,
Avin. Yes, Avin.
Budram.
Yes.
Avin Budram, you said.
Avin Budram. And then the next one will be from Envoy Makam. Envoy Makam, M-A-K-A-M. It's the banking industry has evolved over time. What I don't see happening is shaping the industry to bring on board small aspiring SMEs in this industry. Maybe I don't have enough knowledge of banking regulations. Your comments, please. And then this one, it's taking you, to your, it's from Sivu Pigiche. Sivu Pigicha. Thank you, Prof, for the session. It is really great to hear from Mr. Rautenbach. Since his appointment is relatively new, I would like to know from him what you liked his legacy at Absa to be at the end of his tenure, whenever that will be. So those three questions.
Thank you very much, Mills. I didn't hear the name of the second colleague, the one that asked about the SMEs.
His name is Envoy. Envoy, yes.
Envoy. So I think we've got questions from Avin, Envoy, and Sivu. Thank you very much for those questions. I think if I start with Avin's questions around being part of the same team and whether that stifles innovation over time, I think it touches on a very important topic, which is innovation. But when you think about innovation, you're actually thinking about your ability to be competitive and to grow, and also to be relevant, Mills. So those are that come to mind if I think about innovation. When you sit at an executive committee, what's critically important equally, and I'll share with you where and how we bring that in, is continuity and consistency, especially in terms of strategy and culture over time. And also, I just want to reiterate this, at a strategic level, the ability to have continuity and consistency is critically important because, at this level of any big corporate, you don't make dramatic changes continuously. Think about this as a big ship that you're navigating, throughout the macro challenges that we've spoken about earlier. Your ability to do that in an agile way, your ability to be responsive, but to still stay true to the course that you've set for your organization and all the stakeholders that is invested in your organization. So, what's critically important, though, as we said earlier too, is to ensure that you don't stifle innovation or that you become stale as a consequence of this consistency and continuity. So for us, what is critical, and for me, what is critical as part of this effort is how you think about the culture of the organization, because that ultimately provides the environment or the context for how people behave every single day. So as I think about this, we've touched a little bit on the leadership and how I put the leadership together a little bit earlier. My philosophy is very much to find the most talented people in your organization to lead these key functions or businesses, and then Mills to ultimately, once you've agreed and you're aligned on the way forward, get out of their way and distribute that authority into that leadership and the structures below them to get on with the task. Because that also speaks to the matters of agility that we've spoken about earlier. And if you make people, or you create an environment where people participate and where people feel that they're accountable for the decisions that they've taken, and feel that they can take the decisions, they automatically embrace the change that is required. And they will embrace the need for innovation and relevance as they execute against their daily tasks. So that's the continuity you're trying to manage, is by ensuring that you've got a culture that enables people to participate, that enables people to make decisions that make people feel part of the organization and the journey that you're on. that allows for innovation and therefore that agility and relevance that I've touched on earlier. And this touches a little bit on the legacy question that Sibu asked right at the end, but I'll come to that just after this. Envoy asked a question around the importance of SMEs, and I have to say that if you think about economies, and if you think about economies specifically across our continent, as banks, we've got a critical role to play to ensure that we can enable entrepreneurship and we can enable SMEs in particular, to drive the economy, to create employment, and to enable the change that we need. If you look at South Africa as an example, we have to sustain a much higher growth rate than the one that we're experiencing today. So, through enabling SMEs, through working with those segments, it allows you to stimulate the economy, create employment, and again drive the innovation and the change that we touched on earlier. So in Absa Bank, we've created one division which we call relationship banking that is led by Faisal Keys, who is specifically focused on commercial, business banking, and SMEs, and in particular SMEs. And Faisal has in his structure created an SME leadership team, to focus on developing that specific segment for the reasons that I've just highlighted. But equally, if you can look at all our markets that we operate in, SME development and enablement is a key part of our strategy as we go forward, Mills and Envoy. So that is key, and banks are systemic to economies. So our ability to do that and being successful in that will lead directly to the growth that you're looking for in every market that you operate in. As I think about my legacy, there's just a couple of things that that come to mind. I've touched on culture a little bit earlier and how important that is, and I think, Mills, that's also one of the key lessons that I've learned over many years of being in management roles and specifically executive roles. So the importance of creating the right environment for people to live out their full potential, for people to play to their strengths, and for people to feel safe, to do that, in my opinion, creates a corporate environment where people can flourish, and through that process, allow them, or through that process, impact society and communities sustainably, as we go forward. A key part of what I plan to focus on in our organization is just how we develop the colleagues in our organization, how we focus on the talent in our organization, and setting them up for success over time. So what you're hearing there is a philosophy of being closer to our colleagues, create an environment where they can flourish, set up processes and development programs that allow them to develop, expose them to different opportunities, different challenges throughout our organization, and hopefully through that process retain them in our organization to be successful executives over time, and the leaders that will come after those of us that are in charge of the organization, that will be in charge of the organization over the years to come. But also, as an executive, every colleague in our organization counts, Mills and Sibo. Every colleague in our organization. We're an organization of 38,000 colleagues. And the legacy that I want to leave as part of, as part of my tenure is just understanding that every colleague in our organization counts. Every colleague in our organization has got a key role to play. And every colleague in our organization is part of the success that we will ultimately achieve as a franchise. So that respect for colleagues, for human beings, understanding that everybody has got a context and making that part of our journey, making that part of our story going forward, ultimately reflecting, in the communities that we serve and we impact. So you can see just how powerful that purpose effort is that we've gone through earlier, Mills, because that speaks to everybody aligning to empowering Africa's tomorrow together, one story at a time. Every colleague counts, every customer counts.
Yeah. Arrie, I want to talk about innovation, which we have already touched on. Just to expand on that, about the role of innovation within Absa. Many studies have been done which show that innovation is a core driver of growth and performance in companies. And within the context of the banking industry, we talk about digital technologies and how these are driving innovation and change in the banking industry, mobile banking, artificial intelligence, chatbots, open banking, cryptocurrencies, and all that. How do you cultivate innovation within Absa? And how do you deal with resistance to innovation within the organization?
Look, Mills, I think the key point that you're making is that the world is evolving fast. And you've mentioned a couple of key topics right now. You've mentioned cryptocurrency. And if you just think about how crypto has evolved in a relatively short space of time, globally, as an alternative currency, to what we've been used to for the last hundreds of years, when it comes to how we see the form factor of money. You've just touched on artificial intelligence and deep learning, and just how quickly that is developing. And if you look at the companies that are involved in AI today, they're some of the most highly valued companies globally. So the reality is that the macro environment will continue to change and change at a faster pace, Mills. So to be able to stay relevant, as I've said earlier, you have to set up your organizational construct, your organizational structures, your organizational psyche, to not just keep pace with that level of change, but also to, in many cases, being able to change faster than what is happening externally. I can't remember the professor that said, if you change slower than the environment that you're in, you're moving backwards. You're busy dying. So you've got to ensure that you can keep up with the pace, and in many cases, accelerate and exceed that pace. So as we think about that in the Absa environment, the points that I made earlier around culture is critical. So our philosophy is that we distribute the leadership into organization as deep and as far as possible, into the depths of our organization. What that does is it allows colleagues that are the closest to the action to get involved in the decisions that is needed to ensure that we stay relevant, to ensure that we solve the problems, to ensure that we are competitive, and the teams that they operate in are competitive. So that ability to distribute the leadership and decision making, what it does culturally, Mills and colleagues, is it brings with it a level of ownership and a level of accountability that is critical when you're a big corporate the size of ours. So you talk about resistance to change or resistance to innovation. In my experience, people resist what they haven't been part of. People resist what they don't understand. People look for safety, in the structures that they sit in. But if you make them part of those processes, if you build an environment and a culture where they're part of these processes, they embrace the change as the opposite to resisting that. So that's the culture that we are embedding in our organization. That's the culture that we're driving off the back of that purpose exercise that I've spoken about earlier. So what you're looking for is that agility, that enthusiasm, that excitement that brings with it innovation in every part of your organization. What we've seen though is coming out of many different consultancy thematics that have been built up over time, where corporates try different models to drive innovation, Mills. And in many cases, you come up with a fast track model, centralizing innovation as a function in the organization. I think we've all learned through that, so you cannot design innovation into an outcome. That is when you get deep resistance to an outcome. So, or to innovation per se, because you're doing it under the banner of innovation. So in my experience, and certainly the journey that we're on in Absa, is to make innovation part of how we do our business every single day. And to do that, you've got to change the culture in the organization. We colleagues start embracing, being part of the future of the organization. And they do that, and you do that by including them in the decision, making them feel part of the organization. When we reset our strategy post separation, it was the first real tangible example that we had to change the culture in the organization. And remember, at that time, Absa was seen as a bank that has gone backwards over a period of time, that has lost market share over a period of time. So that strategy reset was our first deliberate effort as leadership to get everybody involved in the organization. And you know what, Mills, this is I think a key takeout for your students. Our philosophy was that we wanted every colleague in the Absa organization to feel that their fingerprint was on that strategy. So when a colleague feels that their fingerprints on the strategy, when a colleague feels that their fingerprints part of the purpose, they feel part of the organization. And through that process, they embrace the change. They make it part of what they want to stand for. The pride comes back. The pride is part of what you're trying to create. So rather than focusing on resistance to change, create an environment where people embrace change and innovation. And through that process, you liberalize innovation across your whole organization. You don't want it in pockets. You want it as part of your organizational culture.
Yeah. Arrie, there's a lot of interest in this talk, this conversation. There's a flood of questions and comments and all that. And some people know you and they've worked, they're saying a lot of wonderful things. But there are also questions, which I would like to take now, before we move on to later to the theme of leadership, to expand on that. One is, is from Samantha Duprier. She wants to know, from aspiring leaders' perspective, give us a glimpse of a day in the life of Mr. Rautenbach as CEO. How chaotic does a CEO's day get? That's the first one from Samantha. And the other one is about, you spoke about losing market share and having to reposition the bank to regain market share. But, given the rapid changes that are happening, largely driven by digitalization. So how do you see competition from their new players, entering the banking industry now, who are not traditional banking institutions? Some of them are retailers entering the banking industry, so you have you've got now Time Bank, you have Old Mutual is interested in entering the banking space and all that. So competition is there, but it's also coming in different guises now. What is how do you deal with this kind of competition? That is from Dumisani, right? That is from Dumisani. And then another one is you spoke about strategy. How is it is from I think it's the same person. It must be Sivu again, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it's about how do you okay, I'll leave it there because I can't figure it out. I'll have a look at it again. Perhaps we can take those two, Arrie, in the meantime.
Yeah, thank you, Mills. I think I've heard Dupriya. I couldn't hear the first name, and I've heard Dumisani.
Yeah, the first one is Samantha.
Samantha Dupriya. The name sounds familiar.
Yeah, she sounds familiar. I think she's my student, and she probably works at Absa.
It sounds like all your other students, top
she works at
talent,
Absa.
top talent in the industry.
Yeah.
He talks about how do you manage your day and the chaos in your day, and then I think you've spoken to digitization, competition, new players, and how you think about all of that. Mills, these questions are not unrelated to the conversation we've had so far.
Yeah.
You'll recall when I spoke to some of the early choices that I've made, since I've taken over as the CEO, and that is really to focus on the operating model, and through that process, the people that I want to lead every part of our business. So whether it's a commercial business or a functional component that enables our business. It was very important to get that done early on, because what that allows is each one of these colleagues to get on with running their part of the bank. The strategy and the purpose bring us all together, so that when everybody does, play to the number on their jersey, as I said earlier, we're still playing as a cohesive unit, behind the team's, team strategy, which is to win the game. So what's very important is that that as you maybe the analogy that I can think of here is, as you play this game of football, you don't want to play it like grade ones. So think about it, grade ones, when they play football, they all run to the ball. They all want to be involved and on the ball all the time. Whereas when you look at professionals, everybody's got a role to play, and they cover their part of the pitch. So as I think about Samantha's question, I don't think about chaos. I think about structure. I think about coordination, and I think about playing football the way a Premier League plays it versus the way a Grade 1 team plays it. So again, I've touched on levels of work a little bit earlier, and trusting the colleagues that you've put in these roles, and empowering them to make the decisions that they need to make on a day-to-day basis. A CEO cannot be consumed in the noise and the chaos on a day-to-day basis. You want to make sure that you can see through that noise, you can see through that chaos, you can see through that complexity, and you do that by surrounding yourself with the right people that does what they need to do, and the processes and the structures around them that does what that needs to do, and that allows you to play football like a professional side, and not like a grade like a grade 1 side. So that's maybe the best way to think about it. No doubt that there's a lot of things that happen in a day, but you can't get consumed by all of that. You've got to trust your colleagues, you've got to trust the structures, and then focus on the things that is important for you as the CEO and for the executive committee. Remember what I also said a little bit earlier, is that nobody has got all the answers. So again, you've got to trust your structures and your systems to be able to play the ball when it comes in their in their direction. There's certainly a lot happening from a technology perspective, from a digitization perspective, from a competitive perspective. And then, of course, banks will always be central to economies. We've said that earlier. Banks are the infrastructure that creates economic growth, irrespective of, where you sit in the world. And because of that, we always directly involved with, with these changes that happen. I can recall in my career as a banking executive when retailers was our most biggest competition, because everybody thought we were going to do banking through retail stores. And to some extent, a lot of that is happening today through retail stores, but be part of that solution. You think about cellcos and telcos and how they came into the space and the role that they play today. So today we both compete and we collaborate in this environment. And of course, regulators have opened up this environment for a bunch of new banks, neobanks, digital banks, other players that want to come into the space, which fosters competition and speaks to that innovation point that you've made earlier. So you want to make sure that you're agile, that you can compete. But one thing that traditional banks have got, Mills, that new banks don't have, is trust, and somehow in a strange way, legacy. It's important for us as banks to protect that, though, to make sure that that legacy doesn't become, the millstone that we carry along with us. So if you look at new banks, if you look at digital banks, what they don't have is they don't have legacy. So they can move fast, but they don't have trust either. And you want to be successful over time through many different cycles. So if you think about the cycle that we're in right now, it'll be particularly difficult for new banks, for young banks that haven't built up that trust. Because when there's a crisis of confidence in the market, customers go to what they know. Customers go to what we call a flight of quality. So I think the challenge for us as banks is to not lose that trust, and then to ensure that we don't let the legacy stay behind. And then, of course, competitors need to build up that trust and legacy over time that consumers can trust. So that's how we think about the environment. But again, to the earlier questions that we've asked, these are all things that you've got to think about as you set your strategy. As you as you set, what the purpose and values are in your organization, and then you've got to commit to that, Mills, because you can't pull this lever, every second day. If you're in charge of a big corporate the size of ours, that is systemic to every market that we operate in. And again, I think for the students that are listening today, banks have got this responsibility of financial stability. And we've all seen the consequences of that, not being in place in 2008 with the global financial crisis. But as banks, that ability to ensure that we can ensure that we create fuel for the economy to grow, but do it in such a way that it ensures stability over time is the critical element. And of course, we do that with other stakeholders like regulators and governments, etc. But especially for us as a systemic bank, it's always very important to have that responsibility in mind, as we stay competitive and as we stay agile and as we compete, every single day for market share out there.
Yeah, very interesting. Arrie, I just want to talk about transformation. You've been in the corporate world for many years, for decades. We've had the benefit of observing the corporate environment in this country over those decades. My question is, how would you characterize the state of transformation in South Africa today, racial and gender transformation today? What do you think? Do you think we're failing to transform? Do you think there's still more to be done? What's your view?
Well, I think this is also a very important question and a very important topic, because at the heart of it, it speaks to sustainable, equitable future that deals with the historical inequalities, that deals with the promotion of diversity, and that creates fully inclusive workplace that is reflective of the society that you operate in. So whether you talk about South Africa or any part of the world, as corporates, that is fundamental. So I think that is the outcome that you want to achieve. I think if your question in terms of corporate South Africa, there's no doubt in my mind that there's definitely a broad appreciation of the importance of creating this just and inclusive society that I've spoken about, that brings with it social cohesion. As a bank, and I'll talk about Absa in a second, but as business, we have got a key role to play together with other key stakeholders. And if you think about other key stakeholders, you've got to think about governments, you've got to think about social partners, and we've got to do that to ensure that we enhance meaningful transformation that addresses these historical injustices that I've just spoken about, and that it allows us to enhance the economic participation of specifically previously included people. And so there's a deep sense of that. Of course, there's progress that have been made, Mills, but you have to say that there's a lot more progress that needs to be made, specifically from a race and gender transformation perspective. So unless you get to that output, you don't get to that sustainable success and inclusion that I've touched on earlier. In Absa, race and gender transformation for us is an absolute imperative to success. We don't view our success from a commercial lens only. So if you think about our ESG strategy that we put in place last year, as part of that strategy reset, we focused on 3 core characteristics that we want to lead on from an Absa perspective. Of course, the first one that jumps to mind is going to be climate, but there are 2 others that are equally important for us. The second one is diversity and inclusion. So we know that to be sustainable over time and to impact communities in a sustainable way, we got to lead on diversity and inclusion, and look and deliberately create the change that we're looking for in this space. And the third element is financial inclusion, again, to the impact that that banks has got. So, I would say that corporate SA is extremely aware of this. Corporate SA has made a lot of progress, but there's a long way to go. We have to be deliberate about that. And at Absa, we are very clear that we want to, set the example of how we go about achieving this, but achieve this in a sustainable way, and be deliberate about that, Mills.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Arrie. So the next set of questions, there's a lot of questions here. Some of them will have to send them to your team for you to go through.
Very, very interactive student.
All right, the first one is from Mielani. Arrie, this is a very important question, and it's very topical and relevant. What is your view on climate financing and Absa's role in energy transition? Then the other one is from Jade Miller.
You're breaking up a bit.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, but the sound comes in and out. I don't know if it's just me or whether it's across the whole audience.
All right. Did you hear the first one, Arrie?
I heard about climate financing and just transition.
Right. So the second one is from Jade Miller. She says, "What is your strategy for attracting and retaining top talent? And what is your approach to talent development? How do you ensure that employees have opportunities for growth and development?"
Yeah, so Nialani asked about climate financing.
Yeah.
And just transition. So one of the appointments that I've made since taking over as the CEO was to create a new role on the executive committee, which is our Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer function, and Punki Madisi leads that effort for us at a group exco level. So ESG has become fundamental to our corporates, enact, in delivering our services and products on a day-to-day basis, or in fact how we think about our impact across societies and and communities. As we've done that, we crystallized, as I said earlier, 3 signature competencies, Mills, that we want to lead in. One of those is climate. The others, I've spoken about diversity and inclusion, as well as financial inclusion. So as we think about climate financing, Absa has been particularly successful in financing renewables. But I think it's important as we think about that what we're trying to achieve here is a carbon neutral economy, or carbon neutral economies that we operate in. And as banks, we can have a direct impact on achieving that. As we do that, though, we got to be very balanced, Mills and all your students, in ensuring that we do that in a way that the impact of that is also sustainable. So if we think about the African continent, there's a huge amount of energy transition that needs to take place, like it needs to happen across the globe. But we also have to do that in a way that allows our communities to sustainably develop. So as you think about it, you've got to think about balancing the E components, the climate components, with the social development and imperatives that we've touched on a little bit earlier. So in Absa, how we think about that is we've got to be very clear about that just energy transition, the role we play in that, and how every project that we finance, both in terms of the transition and current projects, irrespective of which sector you're in, that it leads you down the path of contributing to both. So you're looking for climate neutrality or carbon neutrality, and at the same time, you're looking for social development and upliftment as part of that process, specifically relevant in the in the African context. So we've got to ensure that that growth and that transition is just in the sense that allows us to balance both those components of the of the equation. Jay talks about top talent and talent development, and I have to say, Mills, one of the one of the key lessons that I've personally learned throughout my career is just the importance of having the right talent in your team, surrounding yourself by the right talent. You know, we talk about the best people often in this case. Jeanette Modisia has just been appointed as an external hire, in fact, into our organization from January this year as our Chief People Officer. I've also spoken about my legacy a little bit earlier. And why this is so important for me is that we can only be as successful as the people that we have in the organization and the quality of the people that we have in the organization, or how we think about talent development over time. So in Absa, we talk about growing our own timber. And I think it's a great analogy to think about this, because, you know, when you plant a tree today, you plant it with a vision in mind of sitting under the shade years from now. You know, so often you plant a tree and somebody else will sit under the shade of that tree, Mills. And again, that's a wonderful African analogy and story. And that's how we think about talent management. And that's how I think about talent management and development is, you know, you've got to work on talent today to lead and drive your organization in years to come. So talent management and our ability to focus on talent, identify it early, and work through smart programs over time to ensure that our talent is relevant is critical. Now, when you talk about talent development, Mills and Jade, it's important that you don't only think technical skills. Mills, as a business school, this is particularly relevant. You know, so as I think about the role that a business school has played in my career and my life, you want to focus on technical competencies in terms of complexity and systemic thinking, but equally you want to ensure that you develop leaders over time. And in my experience, not enough focus is on leadership development, you know, emotional maturity, resilience, agility, leadership competencies, you know, all the things that we touched on earlier. So in Absa, what we're now trying to do is, under Jeanette's leadership, we're putting together clear structures that allow us to develop our leaders, not just technically, but also socially, the softer elements of, you know, of leadership that we don't often talk about, that we develop that resilience, that ability to deal with complexity, that agility that is required to deal with this complexity of the world, this rate of change of the world that we've touched on earlier. So I think finding that balance to ensure that leaders are whole people when you put them in senior roles is critical, Mills. And that for us is a big element. You cannot underestimate the importance of soft skill development, emotional maturity, you know, spiritual resilience, wellness. These are all components that speaks to people that have got the competency, the ability to deal with the complexity of, you know, of the environment that they are going to be expected to operate in when we put them in, you know, in leadership roles. So I can't think of anything more important than any corporate than to focus on your talent and the development of your talent and growing your own timber. And through that process, you equally speak to retention. The war for talent is at a level that we've never seen before. You know, I was reading an article this morning just around how salary increases are one of the key drivers of inflation, and that is as a result of the shortage of skills across the global environment. And Africa, we've got the added challenge that they often see Africa as the pool to fish in for global talent. So as African corporates, we got to protect that talent and create opportunities for them in their own environments to be developed and to be competitive. But this is where the real need actually sits. If you listen to the conversation that I've shared with you earlier around the continent and what we need to do for growth on the continent. So this is a topic that I'm particularly passionate about.
Yeah. Arrie, this is a comment rather than a question from Sibulelo Namani. I've had the privilege to observe Arrie closely when he was the chairman of the Group Change Council, and I was the secretariat, and later when he was a sponsor of one of our large programs, the Collections Transformation Program, and I was the program director. I always marveled at the clarity of thought, the ability to mobilize colleagues behind a common vision, and his decisiveness when it comes to decision-making, while allowing colleagues space to bring value to the table. So this gives us an insight into you as a leader, Arrie, would you like to expand on that? Your leadership approach. What kind of a leader are you? I mean, this has been well described by Sibulelo. You would like to expand on that?
So, is it Sibulelo or Sibongile? I couldn't remember the name.
Sibulelo Ngamani.
Sibulelo. It's good to hear that there are so many Absa colleagues on your BITS program, Mills. It's it speaks to the fact that we're focusing on talent development quite strongly. Mills, when it comes to leadership, I think there's an important philosophy that I've subscribed to. And as I think about leadership, I don't think about leadership as a position. I think about leadership as a disposition. So it's actually a state of being, rather than a specific role that you hold, because roles change over time. But who you are as a person cannot change. You gotta stay true to who you are, to your value system, and what grounds you as an individual. At the same time, what you've heard me talk about many times is, for me, what's critical is that, as you lead, you're only as successful as the people that you surround yourself with, your immediate team, and then your ability to set them up and get out of their way. So that ability to distribute that decision-making or that authority deeper into the organization, in my opinion, is a critical part of success, and what I view as core to my leadership style. So at the same time, you've got to understand that the accountability stays with you. That's not something that you can delegate. So when things go well, you want these colleagues to celebrate it. When things go, you go wrong, you need to step in and own that challenge, and help the organization to deal with the learnings that you've taken from that specific challenge. So the ability to distribute authority, to empower colleagues, to create space for them to be the best that they can be, and also to find what they're good at, Mills. So we all carry certain signature talents, and your role as a leader is to identify what is Mills good at, what is Arrie good at. Are we playing him to his strengths? And then you come back to that team analogy that I've used earlier. If I'm a striker, don't play me as a goalkeeper. You're going to frustrate me. I'm going to frustrate the team, because that's not my signature skill. So if you really deeply understand colleagues, you drive talent management in the way that I've spoken about earlier, you can play people to their strengths and then give them the space to live out their full potential. And then, as I said, that philosophy of the fact that a leadership role is just a temporary responsibility that you take on. So what helps me stay grounded is that none of this is permanent, actually. So that's why I'm saying leadership is not a position; it's a disposition. That mindset shift, or that paradigm to hold, is critical, and it certainly holds me grounded as a leader. As a leader, it doesn't matter where you operate, in society.
All right. Two more questions from our audience. Arrie, Sivu again, and then I'll come to Shihwane. So Sivu, as an entrepreneur in the affordable housing finance market, the existence of my business is due to the gaps left by large organizations such as Absa. Is Absa keen to partner with organizations such as ours, which uses innovative tools to assess opportunities in the mass market and township markets? That's a Sivu again. And then Chihwane is a student MBA student here at WBS Business School. And Chihwane did some research which found that banks invest heavily in data collection for their processes, but they struggle to innovate this data for gaining a competitive edge and adapting to compliance regulations. The challenges seem to stem from a lack of skilled personnel and inadequate management. Despite senior leadership emphasizing the importance of data, banks still face difficulties in effectively utilizing it. What is your perspective on this matter? So that is from Chihwane. The first one from Sivu, and the second one from Chihwane.
Yeah, thanks, Mills, and thank you for those questions, Sivu and Chihwane. So Cebu speaks to being an entrepreneur, and I must say I've got a tremendous amount of respect for for entrepreneurs, and also for people in the corporate structure that enroll for these programs while they hold full-time job or try and build a company like Cebu is doing, Mills. That's part of the learning, in my opinion. And I've spoken about work ethic a little bit earlier, and that never give up sort of mentality that I've learned from my mother. So be able to do this and still have the ambition, to improve yourself because you believe you can make a bigger change over time is wonderful to see. And as I said, hugely respected. Affordable housing, social change, mass market is the thematic that Cebu spoke about. And he would have heard me say earlier that we've under Punki's leadership, we came up with 3 core signature areas that we want to lead on from an ESG perspective. One of them is financial inclusion. And, financial inclusion on our continent speaks directly to the mass market, and that inclusiveness that I've touched on a little bit earlier when we spoke about transformation. So affordable housing for us is a key focus area. And in that segment, being able to partner with entrepreneurs is something which we already do, but we need to do a lot more of as you want to solve that challenge. In fact, in our mortgage business, they reset their strategy a couple of years ago to one of housing the nation, housing the nations that we are operating in. So that speaks directly, Mills and Cebu, to financial inclusion and working with partners, entrepreneurs that all form part of that value chain to ensure that we bring more people into the financial system. So certainly very excited to work with the likes of Cebu and others to ensure that we complete that value proposition and collaborate to ensure that we can expand access and financial inclusion. Data collection is a hot topic, but it's also a journey that we've been on as part of digitization across the world and also in our own banks. So as you think about digitization, what it brings with it, Mills, is a traceable data footprint. That's the change between analog and digital. In this world, everything leaves a footprint. So whether you do a payment, or you go into some form of transaction, or you visit the site, all of that leaves a data footprint, and that is what we all busy grappling with now. Is how do we deal with that data responsibly, and how do we ensure that we can continue to digitize, but do it in such a way that it doesn't compromise individuals, communities, societies, and even in many cases sovereigns, because of that value that comes from that data. So the ability to be responsible in that data management, to build skills, to build processes, to build applications that allow us to do that is a big focus for us. It's a big focus for us in our own organization. But we've got lots of good examples already of where we've done that successfully. But you can see globally just the effort that is going into, making sense of this massive change that is happening as we move out of the old analog world into the digital world. You read about data breaches every single day, but we're working with massive global tech structures, to ensure that we collectively work on these ecosystemic challenges, so that we can use that data for the benefit of everybody. For the benefit of individuals, for the benefit of of societies, and to bring that inclusiveness that is required. So as I think about digitization, the magic source in that is data and the ability to look after that correctly, and then to use that smartly, to get to better outcomes. And that brings efficiency into the bigger, into the broader and the bigger system. But a massive focus. A massive need for talent, talent development, collaboration across sectors and industries, Johnson Ideso, who leads our technology franchise, just came back from an extensive global trip last week, just to collaborate with global tech players, Mills, to help us as an organization to deal with the tech, the application of the tech, the processes, and also the talent to ensure that you get to a better outcome. And that speaks to compliance, it speaks to hyper-personalization, it speaks to the right product at the right time, at the right price. This is all the stuff that you can do if you can start managing these processes and your ability to collect and manage data responsibly, as we go down this journey. But a massive learning curve as we go along, and something that we're evolving in very fast. So you talk about agility and these things. This is one of those key areas that we're investing heavily across industries, across the sector, and equally so in the Absa organization.
Yeah, I mean, you've been in banking for over 25 years. You've achieved so much, and what stands out for you? What are the highlights in your career over the last 20, 25 years? What has really stood out for you?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I think as I've reflected a little bit earlier on my childhood years, as I reflect about my career, there's not a particular element that stands out more so than any other part of my career. I would say to you that I think my career is my highlight. It's the journey that I'm on. It's the journey that I've been part of. It's where I've learned from. I've engaged colleagues, clients, investors, everybody that you touch and touches you as part of that process adds something to your life. So for me, I would say that my whole career has been my highlight, and I've learned so much from it until now. But I wanted to stay my highlight, and I will continue to learn from it as I fulfill this role as CEO with the rest of the colleagues in the Absa environment. So lots more to learn, lots more to enjoy, lots more to embrace, for sure.
Yeah, and any regrets?
You know what, Mills? What I've learned in my life is that you actually don't make mistakes. You make certain choices. At the time, it might come across as a big mistake, but over time, you realize the importance of having gone down that journey at that specific time of your life. But this is wisdom that you gain over time. I've learned to embrace that. It doesn't mean that it's not incredibly painful. It doesn't mean that you just take mistakes lightly. Of course, you look at them deeply, but they're there for a reason. It's a bit of a philosophical approach, but I think it's for me critical to understand that every part of the journey that you're on has got some contribution to make later in life. If you're reflective, if you take it seriously, if you think about your impact, then every one of these interactions build you as an individual over time, and it allows you to stay humble, and it allows you to stay in touch with the realities that you're part of every single day. So I wouldn't go and change anything, but it doesn't mean that I haven't made mistakes, and learn from these mistakes. But I do think it's collectively part of the journey that we are on. Yeah.
How do you relax? You're very busy. How do you relax?
You know what, Mills? There's 24 hours in a day, and it's the same for all of us.
Yeah.
But absolutely, what's absolutely true is, we have to relax. And I think about a book that I've read many years ago of Stephen Covey, when he says, to be effective as a leader, you also got to take time out. He talks about sharpening the saw, in that specific example. I think it's 7 Habits for Highly Effective People or something like that. And in my life, I focus on that very strongly as well. So I spend a lot of time watching sport, but also participating in sport. Even today, still, even though I was born in '65, I still view myself, as very competitive physically. So I have done the Absa Cape Epic 3 times. It's the toughest mountain bike race in the world. But it's for me an opportunity to be physically active, Mills, and to be out there competing in a different environment, which challenges you in a different way, stimulates you in a very different way. My daughter and I spend a lot of time, in the bush. We both crazy about wildlife, but I'm also a very keen amateur photographer. So I've invested in some equipment over time. I enjoy the creativity of being a photographer and see what you can do. But just the ability to be in the bush, enjoy that time with the people that you love, but also at the same time being creative as part of that, as part of that effort. And then I've learned to appreciate art over time, but not as I think about art, I think about it in the sense that people see the world through different lenses, Mills. And for me to be able to see the world through somebody else's lens is hugely insightful. But I do that very much, with looking at local artists in the communities that I am either part of or that I go to. So through that process, it also allows me to not just be in contact with the community, but also get a sense of how they look at that, look at the world, and through that process contribute, to their success as well. So I'm continuously finding different ways to stimulate me. I have to say that lately, and I haven't told too many people about this, but I bought myself a very fancy coffee machine. So I want to learn to become a barista.
I must come for coffee.
You must come for coffee. Coffee is one of my vices in life. I enjoy it very much, and now I'm beginning to study it, and I'm beginning to immerse myself in it. And I've enrolled for a barista course, so I'm really learning the art of coffee making. So if there's anybody on this call that has done that, I would certainly like to get their feedback. But I think it's important that you keep yourself busy with different things, so that you stay balanced. And that when you come to work, you can come with your full self, energized. That the saw is sharpened, as I said earlier, and you do that by stimulating yourself across all these different elements.
Yeah. All right. That's how we come to the end of this afternoon's conversation with our guest, Arrie Rautenbach, CEO of Absa Group. Arrie, thanks hugely for this substantive, incisive, educative, discussion we had this afternoon. And thanks for your leadership and service to our country. In closing, I would like to thank everyone in the audience who attended and participated in this event. I would like to thank, in particular, my colleagues at WBS who have worked behind the scenes to make this event a reality. From WBS, Jason Carson, Alison Gaylord, Tebe Chachwayo, and Rihandu Makama. And from Absa, Njaji Petros, Donim Tombeni, Kulari Koma, Viwe Taliane, and Charlene Middleton. That's the end of our discussion this afternoon. Thank you very much, everybody. Good evening. Thank you, Arrie. All the very best. Appreciate it. Thank you. All right.